pleasure being here in Singapore. My name is Matthew Roszak. I'm chairman and co-founder of Bloq, an enterprise software company. I'm also a founding partner of Tally Capital. I've been an investor in the cryptocurrency and blockchain ecosystem for the last 5 years. And unless you've been under a rock for the last few years and you've not heard of blockchain, it is literally permeating through every financial services company, every Fortune 500 company, every government, and really a theme that's up there with internet 25 years ago, cloud 10 years ago. Everybody's innovating, exploring, and educating themselves on what it means, what it is, what it isn't. And today we've got a rock star panel. I think every theme today, every panel touches upon blockchain, tokenization, Bitcoin, ICOs, and we just have an amazing panel here today. I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves briefly and then add two things. We want to get to know you. So mention something about when you first got into blockchain or crypto, and tell us a fun fact.
Okay, that wasn't in the prep notes. I'm David Rutter, the CEO and founder of R3, which is an enterprise software company backed by a large number of financial institutions and a community of over 160 organizations working towards a common goal of using this new technology to change finance and how transactions are processed. I got involved in this about 3 years ago. My previous role, I was the CEO of BrokerTech and EBS, which are two large global fixed income and FX exchanges. My founding partner, Todd McDonald, kept talking about this thing called Bitcoin, which I didn't understand at all. I started paying attention like everybody else when the price spiked to $1,000 some years ago. And then began to think about how we could apply the technology to regulated finance, which is all based on trust. So we took a very different course, and as many, hopefully of you know, we built the Corda platform, which is distinct from almost any other blockchain technology out there. I don't know, fun fact was I was in semi-retirement at the time when I discovered it, and loved my wife dearly, but too many coffees and midday walks, so I'm back to work for another 10 to 15 years.
In the right space at the right time, David.
Hi, I'm Joseph Lubin, co-founder of the Ethereum project, founder of Consensus, a company that we started about 3 years ago to continue the vision of the Ethereum project. Consensus is currently operating along 4 prongs of activity. We build infrastructure for the Ethereum ecosystem. We've had 200,000 downloads of our developer tools. We enable 1.5 billion requests per day on average from the public Ethereum ecosystem with a bunch of our infrastructure elements. We build core components at the application layer, things like self-sovereign identity, reputation, lots of different aspects of tokens, including exchange, decentralized governance, accounting, auditing, general ledger tools. All of those things are used by many of our projects to test the hypothesis that decentralization is changing the nature of business, where in the Web 2.0 world, businesses offer services to consumers in a somewhat adversarial relationship. We believe that we're moving to a world where protocol-based open platforms with supporting end-sided markets will enable lots of different people in different roles on these platforms to emerge a set of services, emerge an ecosystem which provides services where businesses once provided those services. So these networks are becoming tokenized and present a new way of organizing our collective activity. We do enterprise and government consulting. We have an academy from which we graduated 120 blockchain developers. We have a venture arm, and we have a token services group that does code audit and legal structuring and development of the token and the token launch and marketing, et cetera. became aware of the blockchain ecosystem early 2011. There wasn't anything I really wanted to do in the ecosystem on a day-to-day basis. I was also living in semi-retirement in Jamaica. And pretty much the only thing that caused me to want to get involved 16 hours a day, 365 days a year was the Ethereum project. So when I met Vitalik about a month after he wrote the white paper, I jumped in completely. Fun fact, I used to have hobbies. I used to play squash very seriously, and I long for the day when, once again, I can exercise regularly.
And Joe says this as a reflex. He doesn't necessarily use the word blockchain. He uses the word networks. I don't know if you caught that. And blockchains, I would, kind of as you're building mental models of this space, think of blockchains as networks and what you could build on those networks.
Peer-to-peer networks.
Right on.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is V. Laxmikanth. Everybody calls me VLK. And since I represent a financial services company, I thought it's good to have a ticker symbol, and that's why my name is VLK. So I represent a company called Broadridge, and unlike the gentleman here, we build applications on top of what these guys build. So we are a $4 billion company based out of New York. Their development center and the Center of Excellence for Blockchain in AI is in India, and I head that center. And our blockchain journey kind of started probably about maybe 3 years ago. And if you look at our business is about post-trade processing, which is, if you really think of it, we provide a utility/mutualization in that space. So it's a natural network. And if you really think of a blockchain, I think the first necessary and sufficient condition is to have a network, right? So we have a natural network, and then we need, obviously, transactions to be secure, immutable. So then we said, okay, this is something that we need to really kind of look out for. And both from an operational efficiency perspective and from an innovation perspective where the market wants us to lead, we are starting to build blockchain applications. Our journey has been, I would say, in 3 parts. One is we have kind of invested in the ecosystem, that is in kind of startups. We made a minority investment in DAH, and which they are building some applications on top of it. We built in-house capabilities. We have about maybe 30 or 40 blockchain/AI developers across the globe, and both business and blockchain kind of experts. And we've had about, I think, 4 or 5 blockchain projects. 2 of them are one is in post-pilot pre-production, you could say. One that's in the global proxy voting space. So we have institutional investors, we have global custodians and the investors. So our network connects this in a transparent manner, providing vote confirmations in real time. That's, I would say, in a slightly more advanced stage, more pre-production. We have clients like Santander, Northern Trust, JPM on that particular platform. We also have recently announced a project on bilateral repo, which is very big in the US market. We have a pilot currently with NetAxis and SocGen. So fairly advanced on our journey of blockchain. And I think some of the functionality that we're building is, I think, beyond, say, let's say payments and loans and things like that, more on some of the advanced use cases. Thanks.
We're not going to get you off the hook. What's a fun fact that you have to share with us? A fun fact.
Fun fact.
Did you have Durian give us like some kind of interesting dynamic thing? Sure.
VLK was the fun fact.
I know. Yeah, I kind of shared with him, I'm a very avid cricket player and a fan, and no time for that these days. So it's pretty much the same thing. So.
Well, thanks, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. And it's great to see such a huge audience here wanting to learn about blockchain and distributed ledgers. I'm Greg Lee from BitFury, and BitFury is the world's leading full-service blockchain company. And we're unique in that we do both hardware and software. The company was started almost 7 years ago, so one of the older companies in the ecosystem. And we do our own full custom design of ASICs chips for mining hardware. We build servers and we build large-scale data centers. and BitFury is probably one of the largest independent miners in the Bitcoin blockchain space. BitFury, we also do blockchain software platform. Recently, we released Exonum, which is an open source platform based upon Rust programming language, and we're using that to deploy blockchain solutions for e-governments, for enterprises, and on all different industry verticals. So, interesting fact about me, I guess being in the blockchain space, in the beginning, I didn't even know why they called it blockchain, so maybe that's a trivia question for people out there. And like my other panel members used to have time for other things, I used to teach yoga before coming into the space, so hope to find some time to do that again. Thanks.
Most people I know in this space tell me something very consistently, that they've never worked this hard before in their lives, which is fascinating. So let's, thank you for the introductions. Let's cut to it. Let's talk about the current state of the industry. Where are we? Adoption. I don't know if we want to talk about what year we are in internet years, or talk about, you know, how to translate some of the hype. And the hype is, to me, is kind of interesting, because in many ways, you know, during the internet heyday, people got really excited about putting pet food and women's shoes and office products online. That was like a big deal. Here, we're building money layers, identity layers, and you know, arguably trillion-dollar layers of the internet, and that's pretty exciting. But put that into context for the participants here, and there's there's banks that we engage with at Bloq, and sometimes there's two different outcomes. One is McKinsey's been in there for 12 months. They have 5 blockchain use cases. Let's do these 3 and go. And we're like, that's impressive. That's really impressive. And then the other discussion will be, again, a large bank will say, is blockchain one word or 2? You know, and they're just trying to figure it out. And that's emblematic of just where we are in the evolution of blockchain. And VLK, you said blockchain is a journey. It's less of a technology, it's more of a journey today. So guys, put it into perspective for the audience.
Okay, maybe I'll start with that. So I think things are evolving very quickly. When we started R3 back in 2014, it was all about you know, informing, educating, and instructing the banks about the potential of you know, cryptographically secured records in the cloud broadly, and getting them away from the fear of Bitcoin. I've told this story a number of times. When I first started sending emails to my bank contacts, they were calling me on my cell phone saying, "Why the hell did you put Bitcoin into an email? It flagged my compliance department." So that's kind of how we started. And so through 2014 and 2015, it was all about education. A lot of stuff done in the lab. We built out a research group.
You built a lab here in town.
Yeah, we do. We have a nice presence here, and the Singapore government has been amazing to work with. We've done a lot with the MAS, including Lubin too, which has been announced here. And we have several other really interesting projects going on with the central banks in the region. But just kind of fast forwarding along to where we are today, we moved from education to POCs, and proof of concepts got old quickly too. So we had what was called R3 Lab. We now call it our services group. We still run POCs. We've run 80 of them, but now they're few and far between. And what we've tried to do is combine, say in trade finance, where we had a half a dozen, really try to push them together and move them into what we call from the incubator into the accelerator as we push them towards production. And because we're a platform company and we don't face the end client directly, we just announced a couple days ago our 60 partners that we work with. We look to team those core apps up with you know, business network operators that will build out those applications and take them to market. So in short, what the banks are now very focused on getting into production. We've done live trades in pilot, but pilot is a very controlled environment. And when you're looking at high value transactions the way we are, your operational environment is very important. The previous exchange I ran on busy days, we'd do $1 trillion a day. If you're going to do hundreds of billions of transactions, you need an operational and a support structure, high throughput, high availability, and so we're working on that now. It's broadly called R3net, so that's kind of what we're focused on. And the banks are ready to go. Second half of 2018, there'll be a considerable amount of business done in the production environment.
And Joe, you play on both sides of the equation. You partner with enterprise, you build decentralized networks. Put that in perspective, what's happening?
Yeah, our perspective on blockchain is much broader than FinTech, although we do a bunch of FinTech work. Ethereum itself was built as a decentralized application platform with the realization that Bitcoin was just the first application on blockchain technology, and with the advent of this new trustworthy, shared, non-redundant database infrastructure, we should enable the world's software engineers to build any sort of application on blockchain platforms. So our perspective is very broad. If you look at how things may evolve, we can look at the 10 years between 89, 90, when the web technologies were invented, to when they ramified for the consumer. And we can look at the longer term too. So it did, in that 10-year period, take that whole time before my mother heard about and maybe started to think about using email. In the meantime, corporations were making use of the technology in intranets. So there are immediate uses. I like to think of that era as the Web 1.0 era, where we had static text, images, hyperlinks. Moving into the Web 2.0 era, we added interactivity, mobile and social. So that first era was the Internet of Information. Second era becomes the Internet of People, essentially. This third era that we have moved into, I'd like to think of as the Internet of Trusted Transactions, or the Internet of Automated Agreements. And as we move towards more IoT and a machine economy, I like to think of that as an emerging Web 4.0 era. On the FinTech side, our company does work with the Monetary Authority, Project Lubin. We do work with Santander, building cross-border interbank payment systems. We built chassis for insurance systems, so we're very involved in that. But we think the real excitement of this technology will be moving towards a decentralized World Wide Web, where we are all interacting on these protocol-driven open platforms. We're interacting from our identity construct, our self-sovereign identity construct, and really we're going to flip the way the World Wide Web works. So instead of spraying our identity aspects all over the internet, having them stored on some corporate servers and monetized by corporations, we expect, and we've already built this and are rolling it out, we expect that self-sovereign identity will be the foundational construct of Web 3 and Web 4, and that we will be encrypting financial, health, and other information and selectively disclosing those elements in situations that we designate. If we want to monetize aspects of our identity, we'll be able to do that. If we want to monetize our attention, we'll be able to do that. And in all of these open platforms, we'll be engaging as one of the elements of these end-sided markets.
And so what do you think we are in terms of evolution? And I like what you said, on one hand, decentralization, but if you're public and regulated, decentralization is a scary thing. But the flight path of enterprise customers, financial services businesses, is a jumping in the pool that's more feels like an intranet, getting comfortable, going through that architectural step change, building an extranet, getting partners, suppliers, and customers involved, and then pretty soon that font of innovation externally, in this case, would be more of a decentralized, and those form factors really resonating and being ready for that. But where are we? Put the timelines in perspective.
Yeah, so this intranet period is very valuable because it enables us and many other companies to interact with regulators. We do a lot of that around the world, to interact with corporations and governments and enable them to wrap their head around the power of the decentralizing technology. Everywhere we go, virtually, regulators are excited about this technology. They're excited about the kind of growth that it can bring, the kind of transparency, the kind of customer protection, consumer protection. I think most of us got into this space because we were interested in building more equitable systems, interested in better consumer protection. And so we don't have a lot to argue with regulators about. We just need to help everybody understand the technology, get comfortable with it, build systems that comply with existing rules, and take a look at existing rules, take a look at how regulators create rules, enforce rules. I think we're moving into a world where regulators are going to have to get much more technical. They're going to be writing specifications instead of writing rules and enforcing rules. They're going to be writing test suites so that banks, insurance companies, etc., can create software that passes the tests and therefore be compliant and make it virtually impossible to fat finger a trade, perhaps. Looking even beyond, when we have a world in which we're tokenizing lots of different kinds of assets and enabling with proper user experience and proper safety in the maturing of this technology, enabling people to custody their own identity, to custody their own value tokens. What does regulation mean in a world where regulation was developed to protect consumers from third parties custodying their assets?
VLK, where are we from your perspective? And Joe brings up another good point of usability, the form factors, owning your own identity, managing your keys, your assets. You know, not too long ago, managing your Bitcoin wallet was like trying to fillet your own blowfish. You know, things could go wrong if you hit the wrong gland. We've come a long way in the bridges, roads, and tunnels of some of these form factors, both at enterprise and the consumer level, but we still have a long way to go.
I think that's a great question, and I think there are many factors that contribute to the identity. And first, let me touch a little bit about the adoption, in the sense that maybe a couple of months ago, I was speaking to a similar kind of an audience. There were probably 1,000 people, and so you asked them, how many of you have heard of blockchain? Probably 600 raised their hands. Then how many of you have done some coding or something like that? Maybe half of that. How many have done a pilot? Maybe 20%, and how many of you have taken it to the next stage? Maybe 10%. So if that's the kind of sample, and I think that's where we are at the 10%, but I believe that 10% will exponentially grow in the next couple of years. Okay. A very interesting report which came out, which said that if you analyze GitHub, 26,000 blockchain projects last year. Okay, it's a very impressive number. Okay, and I mean, GitHub may not really be a true representation of what's happening, but even if 10% of them really gain steam, it's a lot of blockchain work that's happening. So I think adoption is going to pick up. I believe that blockchain in the next couple of years will be mainstream. But I think if you look at it from our perspective, and more from an industrialized version of blockchain, of course, the platforms are evolving, but I think there are two key issues that we need to kind of, I would say, fix before we get to the next level. One is, of course, interoperability, right? So when you talk of interoperability, it is like permission with public, how the two talk together. Okay. Then within an organization, you may have permission, but then you may have something on KYC, something on corporate actions. How do they to talk to each other? Okay. Then legacy systems with permission. So there's a lot of interoperability factors. And the key to solving a lot of them is obviously the identity issue. Okay. While we're looking at it from a personal identity, but I think if you look at it from an organizational construct, a legal identity is a different ball game, right? So you may have an organization, there's a legal entity, there's a subsidiary, there's another subsidiary, and there's an individual. So there's one identity, okay? This organization could merge with another organization. So then what happens? It could demerge. Then what happens? Okay. So a lot of things on identity and interoperability that are going to be key to take it to the next level. But if you ask me, I think the good thing is all the vendors are, looking at the similar problems, and a lot of it's about standardization. So as long as the standards come together and we have a roadmap, I think we're good to go.
And Greg, we're gonna jump to interoperability, and it's gonna come back to you, David, because you're pressure testing a lot of stuff with existing bank environments, et cetera. But when you're launching Exonum and you look at the world as a multi-network, multi-chain, multi-token world, fast forward this movie that we're a part of, how do you build product when it's still so early? What's kind of the approach you take when you start with kernel of Exonum?
No, that's a great question, and it really is still early days. So kind of going back to your first question and answering it in this one is, remember back in the early days when maybe your company just had its own intranet. I could only send email within my company, and God forbid, send an email outside. So the way we're looking at a lot of this private blockchain development is to build these private blockchains as they suit the particular enterprise or the e-government application as it is. So first build the intranets, and then at some point all the intranets will figure out how to speak to each other through the internet as we have today. So through the interoperability between the different blockchain platforms, the different blockchain solutions, that's yet to be seen. What will be built, whether it's a layer 2 application, whether it's an entire new network infrastructure. But I think the entire ecosystem is flexible enough and creative enough to find an interoperability solution, and maybe it doesn't even exist yet, but everyone now is trying to educate themselves on the power of blockchain, which is immutability, auditability, transparency, and the ability to digitize assets. And I think that's what's exciting a lot of people, particularly financial institutions and FinTech. And we do believe that there will be an interoperability somehow. Some believe it be the Bitcoin blockchain because of the strong backbone it has now. Others are building applications on top of that. But for example, we have an application in the Republic of Georgia in Europe where we've put the entire country's land titling system on the blockchain. So now a citizen in Georgia, they have a piece of paper that says they own a piece of land. They keep it under their bed or put it in the safe, but they also have a unique digital signature, a digital hash code that this is their unique digital asset. And by the end of this year in Georgia, we're working with smart contracts so they can now trade and sell, buy land using smartphones. So the ability to transport and trade assets digitally across the blockchain, that's amazing. And linking that to the public blockchain for added security, and then eventually linking that to financial institutions and legal companies, accounting, that's the goal, I think, for all of us sitting here. So it's a really exciting space to be in.
Back to you, David, on interoperability. You're pressure testing a lot of the stuff within banks, and how do you approach that?
So I get asked all the time about how much R3 resources being spent on interoperability to the other two main platforms in banking and finance and insurance, which are IBM's Hyperledger Fabric and the Ethereum application with the quorum filter layer and Corda. So there's kind of three platforms that come up globally. I'm always asked what we're doing to interoperate with those platforms, and the answer is absolutely nothing, because we have 60 partners and hundreds of core apps being built, and we want to empower everyone in this audience and make it easier for them to take innovative financial ideas, build applications, and actually have a chance to succeed. It's very hard to be a small entrepreneur and sell your product to a big bank. We hope to empower you to do that by having the Corda platform support your applications and your business networks. So then the next step for us is to make sure that all these business networks that sit on top of Corda can interoperate with themselves. And we call that the collaboration zone. So we're spending time thinking about kind of what common features we need for all of our application providers to interoperate amongst themselves. So that's the big step for us. The other thing is, I'm not a technology guy, but I am told that interoperability, to be able to have atomic settlement with the cryptographic proof between platforms, is actually quite difficult. And that's something that will, evolve down the line. But one thing I am seeing, and I'd be interested in Joe's perspective on this, is that the markets are too smart to end up with a bunch of vertical, bespoke, proprietary solutions. That's what we have today. When the new CEO took over RBS, he talked about the 5,000 bespoke systems. One of the reasons we went the platform route is that I've been trying to introduce new technologies to large financial institutions for a long time, and it's just a complete mess of independent, both homegrown and third-party systems, and I think we're going to avoid that in the future. We're going to drive adoption around a couple different platforms, and eventually interoperability will evolve out of that, but it's not in the near-term future for us.
And Joe, as you talk to both, I guess, enterprise customers, and you look at every McKinsey, every Goldman report that says blockchain technology is going to save hundreds of billions of cost, right? And I kind of look at that and say, well, that's just not the point of blockchain. It's not a cost reduction mechanism. It's about building those new decentralized peer-to-peer networks. And on top of which, in the last year, the cryptocurrency market has gone from 10, 20 billion to 200 billion. And so the ground is kind of shifting underneath people's feet in terms of this new medium of money, these new digital assets, these new rails are developing. How do you put that in context for a big bank?
So in a sense, it is a cost reduction mechanism because instead of building, as you indicated, these siloed systems, siloed IT systems based on legacy database technology, you have this new breakthrough, trustworthy database system, and you can build shared non-redundant is hopefully less expensive infrastructure for sectors, for value chains, for entire industries, cross-industry platforms. So I think there will be huge savings. There is some redundancy built into the system. That's how you get your trust. But the trust itself will, I think, cause tremendous cost savings. Going back to the previous question, we're embarking on an era where we can move the foundational elements of our society, things like identity and money and agreements and reputation, from their frictional forms, from their analog forms, all of which have long clearing and settlement delays when they're involved in transactions, into a world where they're all realized as native digital elements on registries, on national blockchains or public blockchains. And so we're going to be able to squeeze the delays, the friction out of these transactions involving those elements, create situations where clearing and settlement is compacted into the instant of the transaction, and that sort of thing is going to drive tremendous growth because you're basically going to be able to remove delays and create value creation events that are closer to one another in time, and like compounding interest, you're going to have compounding value creation. The danger of that is that your identity is natively digital and your value tokens are natively digital, and we need to prudently, to answer your question, prudently, carefully build that infrastructure at the application layer, and that's going to take a bit of time. But if you think about it in those terms, the growth potential is enormous. We're just going to have to take a lot of time to get it right. We have a security audit team that's growing pretty rapidly at Consensus, and we could have put out a lot of software a long time ago and have been very careful.
I'd like to build on what Joe was talking about in terms of when speaking to institutions or customers, it's not necessarily the conversation about reduction in cost. Really what we focus on is the value creation that Joe was talking about in efficiency, but also in the velocity of able to trade assets. to digitize these assets, to have these transactions almost automated practically 100% using smart contracts on the back end, which reduces the need for people actually stamping pieces of paper. Mistakes might be made in entering an extra zero or one less zero. And also in terms of audit. I mean, I know Deloitte is our nice sponsor for this pavilion, but imagine instead of having auditors coming in and sitting with you for 3 days a week, now they just spend 10 minutes and look at the blockchain transactions and say, oh, okay, you're now audited. I mean, the amount of time that you'll save and you can put these people and resources in other areas is value creation and efficiency and more transparency. So these are the areas we focus on when we're creating Exonum platform applications. So.
Now, VLK, when you talk to a new customer, how do you build the compass? How do you think about use cases? A lot of people fast forward the blockchain movie and start talking about something that's pretty far out there. It's like talking about Uber 25 years ago. It'd be a great idea. We'd be high-fiving each other like this is going to change the world. But realistically, all those interstitial layers of tech, Joe talks about identities, these fundamental infrastructure layers, to make Uber when it became what it became, it took a while, right? And so what do you promote as the initial scaffolding and the initial on-ramps for your customers?
So I think, if you 3 years back, when blockchain started to, get some press, so if you went to a CEO and talked to a blockchain, there was like, okay, not another thing again, right? So you had another mainframe, and then you had client server, then you had web, and now this is something which is going to solve world hunger. That was the initial kind of reaction, right? But I think once people understood the power, and especially the power that he talked of in the trust, right? I think one of the keys is to be able to monetize that trust, or at least convey an economic value of the trust. So let me give you an example. For example, I come from India, so I can give an example from the Indian context, which is India has introduced an identity system called Aadhaar, which every Indian pretty much has it now. Originally, for opening a bank account, you didn't have Aadhaar. It used to cost 150 rupees. Now with Aadhaar, it's like 15 rupees. So the cost of that trust is the difference. So. And that's how we start to build use cases. When we start to talk to our partners, we talk about the value creation, while operational excellence is one part of it. Then we spend time with our customers and figure out, first is there a network involved? Okay, are people going to be writing to this network? So how many people are involved in writing to the network? Does this transaction need to have some kind of consensus mechanism? So we go through this, I would say a review process, and then present. So, for us in the post-trade processing space, it's fairly a natural, fit. But then if you talk, there are many other applications. KYC, the minute the MAS is doing a KYC. So you imagine if you have a standardized KYC across the globe, if not across an organization. You have trade finance as an example. So our methodology has been more about engaging the customer, understanding the business context, breaking that business context down into what I would call blockchain allowable, parameters, and then, making the business case for them. But the key is, moving them from an idea of operational excellence to actually using the power of the blockchain. So, see, we talked of, earlier, settlement used to be T plus whatever, T plus 2, now it's T plus 1, and with blockchain it's T plus now. While that may be good from a technology perspective, but then the financing requirements and how the organization operates at a T plus now is very different, right? So sometimes it's more like you go through the traffic, you change one red light to green, and then you have a jam at the other place, right? So the question is how do we have an end-to-end flow of the whole process? That's the way we are approaching it at Broadridge.
Makes sense. Let's talk about economics, economic models. Building a platform for people to share, be a platform builder, be a platform participant, tokenization. What's the economic model today, tomorrow, and in the future as blockchain builders and seeing this ecosystem evolve over the medium to long term? And Dave, you've built market infrastructure that's had incredible throughput, and you've got a pretty good sense of what you're building today. What is that economic model?
So I always look at the economics for us based on the economic value we create for our customers. So as we mentioned here, you know, when you look, or you mentioned actually, you look at the projections about cost savings, and they're in the tens of billions or maybe more. McKinsey thinks they're a lot more. I get asked that question all the time too. That's not my job. I know.
It's a big number.
It's a big number, and it's the largest pie that I've ever kind of gone after. So the economics for us are really about you know, how much value we're creating. That being said, we want Quarter to be used globally. So it's a different model than I used to run, where it was very high monthly fees for a small number of customers. You know, we're starting with the banks and big insurance companies because we have to get that part right first. But we see the benefits spilling down to consumers everywhere. We think we can make banking the unbanked affordable and things of that nature. So we do hope, you know, some good comes out of this. So we have an enterprise software pricing model, which by my previous career is very, very cheap. And you know, we look to scale through our partner network very quickly. One other comment about when we look at the value here, folks do focus on cost first, and that makes sense. If you're a CEO of a major bank and you think you can cut 10 to 20 billion out of your cost line, that's going to keep you in the job. It's going to help you with your bonus and the like. But I think it's far beyond that. I tell folks that that's too narrow of a focus. There's tons of new products and new opportunities that are going to come out of this. And institutions that we know today, like SWIFT, DTCC, CLS, large banks, they're going to change. But in many cases, they don't provide a single service. So just by introducing new technologies, you can create tremendous economics, but there's legal and regulatory infrastructure that needs to evolve as well, and that's why we're all spending so much time with regulators and really focusing on, you know, operational and legal impacts as well.
It makes a lot of sense because, you know, you get intoxicated with blockchain and this transformative dynamic, and I think the cost, the growth, the transformation, if you could build that staircase step, it's kind of like the flight path of enterprise adoption of most new tech, and you can't just jump over to transformation. And so getting into the pool, getting wet, learning how to swim, getting the people, process, tech internally aligned, it puts you in better position to see and open these doors that you can't see right now.
Yeah, one comment on that. For anyone that says they know exactly where this is going, they're full of it. You know, look, this is an iterative process for all of us. We very specifically designed a large ecosystem to improve the probability that we will be successful. And we look for feedback. We watch what, you know, everybody's doing in the space to try to be smarter.
Joe, economics, tokenomics. How
What's
does one look to make money, save money in this space?
So I guess when building out the emerging decentralized ecosystem, we have some advantages. We developed a platform, the Bitcoin developers developed a platform that has these protocol tokens. And so when we built the Ethereum system, we sold a token, protocol token, not an equity. That protocol token enabled people to be part of this network ecosystem, enabled people to use this this world computer. And we sold it to 9,000 different stakeholders, and those people and all the people that they subsequently brought into the ecosystem became proponents. They became incentivized business and software developers. Upon that platform, we created a token standard, the ERC20 token standard, to make it easy for projects to create their own utility tokens, their own protocol tokens, to define networks, define these decentralized applications that can be accessed through these new utility tokens, sell those tokens to a broad swath of stakeholders. Some of them are business developers, some of them are software developers, some of them are speculators. Speculators are good. They take on risk in exchange for potential gain in the future, and speculation in this ecosystem has driven a tremendous amount of innovation. It's driven a tremendous amount of the development, the building of functionality, of foundational elements. And so these different positive feedback mechanisms where people can define a project, write a white paper, build an MVP, hopefully, and then get early broad stakeholdership will drive so many people to be highly incentivized to add value to these platforms.
Yeah. And VLK, Greg, think about government adoption, government approval of blockchain. This is a question from the audience. Will government regulation and adoption help legitimize blockchain tech? I mean, we're in a, when you're talking about money factors in certain use cases, the government imprint and regulatory regime and adoption of that is of consequence. Will that accelerate that? We're seeing that firsthand here with Project Lubin and some other regulators around the world sponsoring projects and being way more innovative than I could have ever imagined. And that's awesome. And will that further accelerate this ecosystem?
I mean, I think the jury's out on that one in the sense that I think a lot of talk today about the regulation is more around the cryptocurrency space, okay? So as blockchain moves, I would say, more to the enterprise kind of applications, we really have to see how the regulations kind of fit in. I think my belief is they will have to regulate, because if you're going to execute legal contracts, so to speak, on a blockchain and in a distributed manner, I mean, they would need to know how it's getting done. So I think there will be regulation, and I think countries which are ahead of the regulatory curve, so to speak, will definitely have an edge. But I think it's early days from a regulation perspective for enterprise kind of, and I think it's the same thing for AI, right? It's still what does a bot do and what does a bot not do, and how is it legal? So I think the same thing is going to happen for blockchain. It's also going to get tied to economic value, right? Because at the end of the day, if you can tokenize every digital asset and then you can monetize it, so to speak, then it's easier to regulate. Obviously, there will be, but if you're not able to do that, I think the question is out there. From our perspective, from a monetary perspective, we are today, our reputation is built around client sat and accuracy and efficiency rates. We are a SaaS provider, so for us, the economic value is more in better quality of service and operational excellence. So I think the whole thing is still out there, man.
A lot of my time is actually devoted, I think like a lot of my panel members here, to actually educating government and regulators. So BitFury, we've founded a few organizations. One is the Global Blockchain Business Council, which is a global organization we founded at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and that's to speak with one voice to regulators about blockchain and help educate them. Another one is the Blockchain Alliance, which is for law enforcement and regulators to understand more about cryptocurrencies and blockchain. And we also have the Blockchain Summit in conjunction with Sir Richard Branson. But we definitely encourage governments to adopt blockchain. And in fact, e-government is one of the areas that we're focusing on. And we have signed an agreement with the country of Ukraine to put the entire country's e-government on blockchain. And this is in the attempt for the Ukraine government to increase efficiency and transparency for its citizens, and to really change how they do government and regulation there. So that's quite exciting. So as governments such as Georgia, Ukraine, and there's many others that we're speaking to start adopting blockchain, that helps both enterprise and FinTech and financial institutions, because at some point the regulator will definitely understand, not just from a white paper point of view, but actually, hey, we have a deployment of a blockchain application in our country, and understand it. So we really spend a lot of time with governments. So.
Yeah, so while we're certainly more focused on decentralizing the world's economic, social, and political systems. That project is going to take a long time, and it's going to require a lot of different people to wrap their head around this technology. In the meantime, we're extremely grateful that this country is taking a very proactive approach to blockchain technology. We do a lot of work in Dubai, built a land title system there, working with 31 different government agencies in the Smart Dubai Smart City project to blockchainify government services. Luxembourg has their own project. So these smaller nations with homogeneous leadership, in a sense, are legitimizing these systems and driving innovation top down. So we've been driving innovation bottom up for quite a while, and it's extremely encouraging to see that we're getting some traction around the world.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're out of time, so please help me in applauding this amazing panel.